This is the story of an ordinary boy and his bike. It is, however, by every measure, an extraordinary tale. Meet Hans Rey. Chances are you've seen his face without knowing the story of how a bike and a dream shaped his life.
Well, I would say Hans Rey is probably one of the most well-known bike riders in the world.
He's, without a doubt, probably had more eyes on him and what he's done than any of the racers or all the racers put together.
I think historically in mountain biking, Hans Rey is like the most well-known mountain biker.
Everywhere I go, Hans Rey. Do you know Hans?
We grew up on Hans Rey. It's like Cheerios.
Hans came to America from his native Germany in 1987 at the age of 20, arriving with little more than a 20-inch bike, a few words of broken English, and a title. Champion of an obscure sport called trials, where competitors ride up, over, and across obstacles.
And he'd come to the United States to sort of make a name for himself, and he was very positive in that attitude that he was going to make a name for himself.
When you look at the things that Hans Rey was doing on a bicycle years before the extreme movement, you really get an appreciation for his vision. To take something that every kid knows about, a bicycle, but yet to put that bicycle in places and have that bicycle do things that no one would ever imagine.
He kind of defines the outer limits of what you can do on a bicycle, and he also defines, the fun you can have riding a bike.
Just a damn good rider, period, right? It's the end of story, right?
By riding his bicycle beyond the limitations of trials, or the entire sport for that matter, Hans transformed the perception of what was possible. This journey has taken him to over 60 countries as a competitor, performer, and goodwill ambassador.
So he's a bit of a hero worldwide.
It hasn't always been a smooth ride,
There was, after all, the crash that threatened to derail his career.
It's not always as rosy as it looks to the outside, being this professional athlete. But
I'm totally amazed what a bicycle has brought me over the last 20 years.
And here he is, Hans No Way Rey.
He's one of the pioneers of extreme bike riding.
That's right.
And you're about to see how extreme he is.
Hold on for a wild ride through 2 decades of mountain biking history as we chronicle Hans No Way Rey's pioneering journey in pursuit of his dream.
It was never a dream about fame and success. It was a dream about following my passion.
Hans-Jörg Rey entered the world on June 4th, 1966, joining sisters Bridget and Sylvia in their Swiss-German household. Like numbers of children untold, Hans was eventually introduced to a bike.
I didn't start till I was 8 years old, if you believe it or not. And I was riding my mom's bike in the backyard. It was like a big 26-inch ladies, typical European bicycle. I could hardly get my leg over it. And then I got my first own bike, I think when I was around 8. Back in Germany, we used to have these safety rodeos. And they had like a little slalom thing you have to ride and a little teeter-totter. And if you won, you got to go to the one of your state and then to the nationwide ones even, It was a pretty big thing. And after we did this initial bicycle rodeo, me and my cousin and all my other friends, we were all hooked on motorcycle trials, But I guess at that point we were too young. Our parents thought it was too dangerous or too expensive. So we started to convert our regular bicycles, Stingray bikes or whatever bike it was. There wasn't any BMX bikes in Europe at that point, or mountain biking hasn't even been invented.
It already started out with you guys building your own trial bikes from the trash. Bonanza bike frames pieced together. They made it happen for themselves. They just wanted to do this.
Unlike mountain biking and BMX, which were both born on American soil, trials had a long European tradition. Hans could hone his skills at events throughout Germany.
Kind of started to go good for us, First we were the local heroes. And then we became
national heroes in a way. I mean, it wasn't like that it wasn't all the newspapers, not by any means, but it was still cool to say, hey,
I'm the second best guy or the best guy in all of Germany, you know. It was the very beginning of the sport, and we kind of were lucky to be there at the beginning and experience it and grow up with it.
By 16, Hans had become the German national trials champion, a title he would win for the next 4 years. And thanks to a second passport, he also picked up 3 Swiss national titles. By 1987, he was consistently ranked one of the top 5 trials riders in the world.
I started to do some pretty big TV stuff in Europe. Before they even had cable, I was on some shows which had like 42 million viewers live, but we only had 2 or 3 channels back then in Germany, so everybody who had a TV was watching.
But even Hans's growing success couldn't stop the hands of time.
Got to the age where I had to get serious about a profession, and then I had to go to the Swiss Army.
Good fortune, it seemed, would follow Hans even into his compulsory stint in the Army.
One of my sergeants in the Army, he was the marketing manager of Swatch. And his boss, the mayor, became the Swiss national cycling coach. So they were all kind of on my program in a way. They gave me time off to ride the bike, and I actually did a demonstration once for everybody, showing them how to put my gas mask on the bike.
After fulfilling his military obligation, Hans attended the University of Stuttgart to study marketing, until the sport of trials afforded him an opportunity to pursue a childhood dream.
The song I Never Rains in California, he played all day. And dann dachte ich, ja.
And then I said, you have to let him do his thing.
Der wird seinen Weg schon gehen.
I went down in probably 1987 or maybe 8 to do a story on Kevin Norton, who was then America's probably most preeminent trials rider. Hansi had come over as kind of like his roommate. Didn't think much of him at the time, except he was wearing these god-awful neon pants that didn't seem to make sense to me, and he had this kind of quasi-Euro mullet thing happening. You know, the whole trials thing too was still kind of coming of age. It had already been pretty much figured out in Europe to a degree, but in America, as with every other aspect of the sport, trials was still in its real formative stages back then.
You know, he was a big hit when he came over here. We kind of needed him too because the sport was so small.
It was, you know, immediately awe-inspiring to see what they could do on a bicycle, because they were doing things even just like right out their front door that you just normally would never associate with a bicycle, how a bicycle is ridden. So I remember, you know, they were just jumping up these cliffs right up there on the beach and doing the nose wheelie thing and stuff like that. And so right away, yeah, it was really impressive, because with the big mountain bikes, we would never do anything like that.
Yeah, I naturally won everything, and I ended up off the back. I think he had a vision. Yeah, Swatch contacted me. We both flew back to New York and did this ad for Swatch, and won this old kind of ride over the taxi in the downtown there. And he could jump much higher than I could. You can only really have one guy in the ad. So they actually put me inside the taxi like I was a driver. So he ended up kind of stealing the show from then on everywhere.
I asked Swatch to pay me $500 to become my title sponsor, and then when I got the contract, they actually gave me $1,000. That never ever happened to me again, that somebody gave me more than I asked for. At that point I was still like, you know, this is going to be a really nice ending of my career. You know, little did I realize that my career was actually just about to start.
As it turned out, California suited Hans just fine. With a little help from friends made on the trial circuit, he made himself right at home in his newly adopted state.
Kevin was really supportive. He introduced me to Penny Westman. She worked for GT at those days.
I had 5 children of my own, and he was young and exciting and interested in the sport. We had to help him with his English, and he was very, very excited to meet Richard Long and Gary Turner, and the fact that he could get someone interested in a bicycle of his own design.
Not long after arriving in America, Hans was signed on as one of the original members of Team GT.
What Hans really brought to the table, I think, was he has a real dynamic personality about him. When you get to know him, he can really energize a crowd of people.
From Switzerland, now he lives in Laguna Beach. It takes
mean, first and foremost, instead of just going out there and doing a trick on a bicycle, he knew that anybody could do that. He even made that remark to me more than once. So his persona was a showman. For whatever Hans did, he developed our name as well as his name. It was a two-way street.
With his bicycle career in high gear, Hans shifted his attention to his personal life.
I have a beautiful daughter named Lisa, and she was a Miss California girl in a bikini contest, and Hans met her. They were in love and lived together for about 3 years.
She also became part of the show.
She's got high dramatic hips, lips like fluid drive, and if you don't believe me, man, just take her for a ride.
Back in the late 80s, we produced this big mountain biking event in Southern California called the Desert to Sea 150. And my partner at the time suggested that we have this European guy, Hans Rey, come out and produce a trials event at the finish area. And not really knowing what trials was at the time, I said, yeah, that sounds fine, whatever. Well, next thing I know, the parking lot at this really nice hotel is filled with all this stuff that looks like it came from a junkyard. And I'm thinking, oh, the people at this hotel are gonna kill me. Well, the next thing I know, everyone's watching this trials event because they're just captivated by these guys jumping over all this stuff. Well, everyone was watching the trials event and no one was at the finish line. I mean, nobody. So we finally got smart and decided to bring Hans to the finish area, and therefore all the people came to the finish area, and there was actually an audience there when these guys came across the finish line. But that was my introduction to Hans Rey.
Pull up to the starting gate, you know you're doing fine. Brother, you just hug that rail till you reach the finish line. If you drive in the fast lane and think you're cruising high, check out your rearview mirror, man. Let the real thing by. 'Cause when I got English.
Despite Hans's personal success, the bike industry just couldn't find a market for the 20-inch bike in America.
Nobody wanted to touch trials at that point. They were all like worried, and they pushed motocross country and the downhill, and that's how the mountain biking boom started. A lot of the trials riders maybe still feel that was always kind of the unwanted stepchild of the federation. I got to the point where I said I either do this right or it's getting time to go back.
By the late 80s, the American-made sport of mountain biking had burst upon the scene, spawning events like the first ever World Championships at Mammoth Mountain, California. Mountain biking's popularity would completely change the landscape of the sport.
My business partner and I were talking one day about the growth of the adult bicycle market, the mountain bikes in particular, and Richard said that he thought that would be a great thing to see Hans start riding those bicycle frames because of the numbers that we could produce. We saw the future for the larger bicycle, which is a 26-inch mountain bike, and so did Hans. He was such a pioneer, such a creative spirit that he saw it actually before we did, and we immediately changed to the adult mountain bike.
Living in Laguna Beach was fortuitous for Hans. Known for its superb mountain biking terrain, it was also home to the legendary Laguna Rads, a group of talented mountain bikers who embraced Hans as one of their own.
Our local mountain biking club, the Laguna Rad, instantly took me on in '87 when I came here, and which really brought me really close to this mountain biking world and made me understand it and made me also become a mountain biker.
Well, it turns out if you know how to ride trials, then you can ride a bicycle. And then after that, it's just a matter of fitness. So I already knew how to ride, just had to get his mountain biking legs. Hans brought a whole another level of what was possible that we'd never even imagined. He'd drop off huge rocks, and all but guess we can drop off the small ones now. If Hans can do that big giant boulder, we can do the smaller one. So I think as a whole, the group benefited.
Even with the support of the Rads, the road ahead for Hans still had some bumps in it.
For people that wanted to try and be professional, it was difficult because there just wasn't marketing there for it. And when I quit racing, 2 years later, downhill got huge, and all of a sudden those guys were all making huge bucks. But I don't think trials ever really did, but Hans marketed himself very well.
And we started doing these special projects where I actually could show my skills in a real situation.
Using his bike, for example, to navigate freeway traffic during rush hour.
It was a really cool Commander production deal, and we had some really cool photos, and we started pushing those photos, and we got exposure way beyond the bike industry with it, and it was kind of a cool thing. And I think it made me realize a lot that, hey, there's a lot that can be done with this bike away from competing.
Despite this realization, Hans continued to support himself by competing in slalom, downhill, and trials events. In '87, he became the only foreigner to win the U.S. Nationals in Durango, Colorado. After that win, the Federation changed its rules, keeping non-citizens from winning ever again. Undaunted, Hans moved on to his next opportunity.
Now I got a phone call from Willy Bogner, a famous filmmaker in Europe for sports, kind of the Warren Miller of Europe. And he was doing a big action sports flick. I mean, we're talking $17 million budget with Roger Moore in it and the whole 9 yards. And they needed a guy to coordinate their mountain biking stunt scene and to find them stunt riders and become one of the stunt guys in it. It was definitely a stepping stone to work with Willy Bogner, and I kept working with him over the years, and it's always like a Class A act.
5, 4, 3, 2, 1, go!
Und hier ist ein Radl vom Beibrach. Pass auf, es wird nämlich steil! Obacht, aufpassen!
It opened my eyes a lot, and I saw a whole new world. I saw new goals.
Someone else who visualized new goals for Hans after his break into film was GT's president, Richard Long.
He knew how hard it was to sell a trials rider. If you go to somebody and say, hey, I know this guy who can do incredible things on a bike and he can ride over a car and jump off a roof, people were like, they couldn't really picture it. It was before Generation X, before extreme games, before biking events were on TV all the time. So then he said, let's just do a video. It was a really cool thing, and we made it short enough, really action-packed in a way, kind of like not really dragging it out. Up until then, the only videos there was of course country racing. 40 minutes women, 40 minutes band. That was it. I mean, it was like watching grass grow.
And be in the place to be.
And that kind of started this whole video boom. And at that point, I already started to get inspired by other people and other sports, and I was looking at extreme skiing, which was kind of big then. This whole boom started when people started jumping off cliffs, and I was like, I don't want to be a mountain bike racer, I want to be an extreme mountain biker, you know?
Hans Rey embarked upon his new career as an extreme mountain biker with a vengeance. Competing and performing for sponsors such as GT and Swatch, he introduced his bike to unique situations all over the world.
Hans Rey was doing extreme sports tricks before they were even known, before they had a name.
Hans was extreme before there was an extreme.
By the end of 1993, he had wrapped his second video production.
Time to wake up. Hey, get up. Time to do some exercise today.
Called Level Vibes, it was filmed all over the globe.
So welcome to Jamaica, man.
I went with Hans to Jamaica, where he was going to ride his bicycle up the Duns River waterfall, which is something I never thought anybody would be able to do. But in the very least, I thought it would be a good opportunity for crash and burn footage. When we got there, there were immediately problems. There was this incredible scene in this office in Montego Bay, a lawyer's office, where Hans was trying to explain to the attorney what it was he was going to do.
What do you want there?
Legal department.
And then the attorney was explaining to his secretary how to draft this release to protect the owners of the waterfall from getting sued.
But Hans gracefully surmounted this obstacle.
When you think of what technically is involved in riding a bicycle up a waterfall, first thing that came to my mind was the rim on his wheel was going to be wet, and that was going to cause his brake to skid, which is something he really needs positive braking. And the other thing is when you stare down into running water, it's extremely disorienting. And it's really difficult to look through the water to see where there might be a little ledge or a little knob for him to jump his wheel onto. So these are two extremely difficult problems to overcome, which of course in the end he did it. I mean, there were people all around the waterfall staring in utter disbelief. And he hopped his bike up, got to the top, you know, did one of these Hans Rey, put his hands out, and the place, over the roar of the water, the entire place just erupted with applause. All the spectators that had gathered to watch this lunatic ride his bicycle up the Dunn's River Falls.
Hans' next stunt would take place on water of the frozen sort.
Kamikaze time. Check out my brake shoes. Shimano gave me some special brake shoes. Supposedly really good in the wet.
We'll find out.
Got me that time! Where are you? You alive? Let's go!
I think the video allowed us to be seen by a bigger, broader audience. People could put in a video that didn't even have to go to a bike shop or didn't know the brand of GT, but because they saw this individual, Hans Rey, doing these extremely crazy things in Africa or this country or that country, I think it brought us to a whole generation of people that would have normally never saw us.
I was always like totally blown away whenever I saw Hans Rey video.
We'd sit there and rewind, play, and try to figure out exactly what he was doing in there.
Hans No Way Ray, the movie, was really the piece that got me into it.
I wanted to be Hans.
I was doing a lot of shows all over the world by then. GT used me a lot in their marketing and advertisements and stuff.
They needed a volunteer to lay on the ground while Hans did some tricks, and I'd seen Hans ride so much I had complete faith in him that, you know, he wouldn't put his tires all over my face. So that was a good time. You know, those are good memories.
All the time I was still competing here on the national level, you know, I was still on Team GT.
It was good to see him out at the races, you know. Back then, everything was a little bit more carefree, you know, people didn't take everything quite as serious as they do now. And I think that's what Hans was really doing, is just doing these things more for fun, you know, showing everybody that he wasn't just a trials rider, that he could also ride downhill, ride dual slalom. Maybe wasn't the best in the world like he was in trials, but was pretty good at it.
And he wasn't really a downhiller at all, never has been, but as much as he was the trials guy and he hung out with guys like Dave Wonderly and all the other guys that were part of the nascent downhill Laguna Rad scene, and as a Laguna resident, Hansi can probably, you know, out-descend a heck of a lot more people than they think they're downhillers, because they're doing those big drop-ins in Laguna.
In the early 90s, he started racing downhill, and I thought he could be like a big-time racer, kind of like I was at the time. And, we were in Hunter Mountain, New York, high-speed section, right-hander, and there's like 3 big kind of hits. I followed him down there earlier in the week and thought, man, he looks sort of sketchy, you know. And it's one of these guys where he gets over 20 miles an hour, why it gets a little hairy.
I wasn't there at the crash, but I saw the video of it, and later on it was just, you know, him coming down and hitting the speed bump and just carrying the speed over, and it just flipped him over. In slow speed, it was great to watch. And but we were down to the bottom of the hill, and, you know, word started trickling down about, you know, Hansi getting hurt. That was one of the first serious injuries that anyone that we, you know, in terms of our, you know, set, that had sort of had to live through, you know. So it was kind of an early reminder. A lot worse were to come over the years, but it was early on, that was a tough one. Yeah.
The accident at Hunter Mountain put Hans in the hospital for over a week. Despite crashing at 45 miles an hour, his injuries were relatively minor. A punctured lung, several broken ribs, torn ligaments, and a lot less skin than he started out with.
10 or 15 of us went to go see him at the hospital, and he's all gurgly and beat up, and he's all like, I almost made it, HB, you know.
It made me realize that I could lose more than I could gain. I was thinking, even if I would be a world champion now in downhill racing, I probably wouldn't get much more exposure or sponsors. And I realized, you know, my roots and my forte is really trials riding. I still did the downhilling and slalom, and I still even competed a few times.
Just months after his crash, Hans won the 1993 Trials World Championships in France. He also surprised everyone by taking a bronze in the slalom. Hans continued to appear in films. He was cast alongside downhiller Greg Herbold in mountain biking's first ever feature film, Tread.
We go this way, Hans. No, this way, Hans. Perfect.
Hans and Greg were cast to star in this endless summer of mountain biking not only because of their superb skills, but also because of their personalities. They both knew how to have a good time on a bike, and more importantly, they knew how to share that enthusiasm with an audience.
There is no plan, like there's no limits. We just ride and ride and ride a little more.
Hans was really on the go, and he was all over the world traveling. He was never in one place too long. So when Marissa came into the program, and that was him kind of dropping anchor, and that was a surprise.
I met Marissa in Cologne. There's a big bike show, a trade show, the IFMA. She had a friend who worked for a sunglass company.
I'd never heard of Hans before. I didn't really know that much about trials bike riding, actually nothing. What Hans did for a living I thought was very interesting and exciting, and my life has always kind of been to the strange side of things as well, so it was right up my alley.
She helped me a lot with my career, with making smart decisions. She was very good in reading people too. She also started announcing my shows.
Ladies and gentlemen, please put your hands together for Mr. Hans Rey.
It gave it a nice touch to have a girl announce it with a girl's voice, and she really knew what she was talking about.
Check it out, people. Each tire is on 2 inches of wood right there. He's holding the position. Let's see what he can do with it here. If he makes it back, yeah, 180 on the cables, one and pulls it up again. Talk momentum, swatches.
That way she was also able to travel with me a lot.
Soon they were on the go in search of new adventures.
So the phone rings, and I hear, Michael, we're going to New Zealand. And of course, you know, who else could that be but Hans Rey, you know. Really, Hans, what are we going to do? We're going to do a bungee jump off of a bridge. It's going to be super. So sure enough, we're on a plane. We're headed for New Zealand, where he's going to ride his bicycle off of a bridge tied to a bungee line. When you watch that footage frame by frame, he slams into the water pretty darn hard. And in fact, later on that day, he was going around, oh, my neck seems to be a little sore. He hit really hard.
Hans's next video, Monkey See, Monkey Do, was a testament both to his sense of humor and his ability not to take his career too seriously. He cast as his sidekick and student a chimp, Mr. Jiggs. By now, No Way Ray was recognizable worldwide, and his videos were being distributed in several languages.
Técnicas que incluyen equilibrio, subir y bajar obstáculos o saltarlos, hacer aéreos o bunny hops.
You know, it's always everyone's dream, and it's a measurement to know that when you can buy your own home, you're pretty successful. And Hans did that in Laguna Beach, of all places, pretty early on in the bike business. He actually had made enough money on a 20-inch bike, which is considered a toy, to go out and buy prime real estate in one of the most prestigious cities in the country. Impressive.
sitting alone. I called from my mother, I was alone. She said, I love you, it was a good thing. Oh, such.
With the purchase of a new home and the prospect of smooth trails ahead, Hans decided to settle down and marry Marissa in 1995. Their large formal wedding was attended by a who's who of biking, including the now famous Mr. Jizz. Having solidified his status as an extreme mountain biker, Hans continued to open new doors. He performed at the Olympic closing ceremonies and at halftime shows.
It was one of the most incredible things I've ever done, riding in front of 45,000 people. I'm so stoked.
He introduced himself and his bicycle to presidents.
Nobody get in the way. Photo race.
And he appeared on a number of television programs.
One of the pioneers of extreme bike riding.
That's right.
And you're about to see how extreme he is. Please welcome Hans No Way Rey.
They call him Hans No Way Rey. And you've got to see his unbelievable bicycle stunts in Extra to the Extreme.
And here he is, Hans No Way Rey.
Reach, are you sure?
When he wasn't busy terrorizing television celebrities, he nabbed the silver medal in ESPN's first ever Extreme Games. That feat was followed by his biggest television appearance to date.
Nice going, Hans.
Some try to talk it down. Why everyone
In my eyes, it was a big success for Hans. I mean, he got to actually play himself on Pacific Blue, which was, you know, a huge show at the time. It was like a Baywatch. It was good to see people actually recognize Hans Rey for being himself.
Oh no, I hate this guy. He thinks he's got to skip the biking.
Isn't that
Yeah. Hans Rey.
Hans No Way Rey?
He's no big deal.
No speed, no balance, no control. It's not enough to flash on your bike. You have precise also to be.
I'm plenty precise.
See, always it's difficult to train. We go for distance, Victor. Whoever goes the most far with the most style wins.
And who's gonna judge that?
She will.
He wants to buy your bike, Dean.
Bicycle.
Bicycle.
That's what you do with a bicycle.
Whoa!
Yeah, this is a 30.
The bicycle is a very utilitarian tool throughout the rest of the world. You know, here it's just an accessory to our lifestyles. To see it taken out of that realm, and here's this guy doing these incredible stunts on it. That was one point when I saw a video that Hans did where I could see in the kids' eyes, they are being transported and carried away. Seeing those little kids just jubilant over what he's doing for them. It's a great thing.
He has just this huge fan club, and it's really neat to see these kids inspired by him.
Here's Hansi out there just surrounded by these kids, and they're just going gaga over him, you know, whereas 9 times out of 10, the racers who we all put up on these pedestals so easily are just these aloof, training machines that just go and train, race, and put their legs up in the condo,
One of the amazing things about Hans is his diverse appeal. Who can do that universally, anywhere in the entire world, pull into any town, can't speak the language, but can get the whole town surrounding him, and everybody is happy and enjoying what Hans is providing. It's an amazing thing. It's incredibly powerful.
But frustrating for those left standing just outside the spotlight. For Marissa, the constant attention on Hans wasn't always easy.
I had his trials bike, and I needed to break through the crowd to get up there to announce the show, but the people were so holding on to their position and didn't want to let anyone in front of them. They wouldn't let me in. I got knocked down and trampled before a show. They were so crazy to not lose their spot, to be close to Hans, you know. And sitting at tables, hearing nothing but German and nobody speaking English to you, it's, yeah, you know, you get lost.
I think it was definitely, you know, hard for her in many ways, you know, because everywhere I go, it's about bicycles, it's about Hans, it's what's Hans doing, you know, it's always what I have to do. Oh, I have to go to Chicago for a show. Oh, I have to go to London for an event. And I can see how that gets old for somebody.
Life then dealt Hans a tragic blow, the death in a motorcycle accident of his friend and mentor, Richard Long. This forced the decision to stop and reassess his path through life.
It became more and more time for me to move on. You know, I was kind of burned on racing. I raced for 20 years. I wanted to get away from the Lycra racing look. I felt odd being at a place like Machu Picchu, Peru, and have a racing uniform on. So I said, you know what, I'm not gonna leave GT, I'm gonna leave Team GT. I'm gonna start my own adventure team. Hopefully I can help GT with that to reach to new markets.
Hans has always been at the peak of all his sports and things like that, and I think for him, when he couldn't compete at the level he wanted to compete at anymore, then he couldn't leave the sport. There was no way he'd leave the sport, so he reinvented himself. The adventure team was just the next thing for him to do, for him to still be loyal to all his sponsors and to bring new sponsors in and carry on in mountain biking, doing new things and showing people what mountain biking is about. I mean, that's what Hans is.
Hansi's out there going just to those outdoor places and way, way beyond where, you know, normal people never trod. And he's still making a living being that person to do that, you know, like Christopher Columbus.
Okay, here we are at the White Goose Pagoda. We just arrived here in Cuba. Here in Bavaria is the starting point of the No-Way Transalp bike tour. Hey, we just arrived here in China. I'm here this week in Slovenia in the Julian Alps with my friend from the Adidas Adventure team.
The adventure team concept allowed Hans to combine his talents with athletes from other sports, adding yet another new twist to his ever-evolving career.
You know, Hans isn't just this one-dimensional bike guy. I mean, most people would have no idea how interested and how involved he is with so-called freaky, paranormal, the obscure and out there type things.
I firmly believe that there's possible life on other planets, or that this Earth has been visited before in the remote past, or that there might have been even a highly advanced technological civilization on Earth before recorded history. I read a lot of books on this subject, and I like to incorporate those things into some of my trips and adventures.
He traveled to China, for example, to have a look at its pyramids in the search for a mysterious tribe of dwarf people from outer space. Called the Tropa, some believe they crash-landed in this region 12,000 years ago.
No archaeologist was allowed to go there. I tried to get there with my bike, and I got pretty far. But then the government who supported our trip, for political reasons, they shut the door on us, but they basically admitted that this tribe does exist and we were on the right path. Egypt has been a fascinating subject for me for a long time. I did the first descent of Mount Sinai, but the real story for me was the whole pyramid mystery, all the cover-ups, the theories. I wanted to shed a little more light onto that side of really what's going on there.
I don't know, Hans has got some crazy theories and reads a lot. He's all mystical and knows all this weird science stuff, and I didn't really get into it.
I was totally into it. I'm open to all that kind of stuff.
In the year 2000, I went to Borneo with my friend Steve Peat, and we were actually out there to look for headhunters. And Doing my research, I kind of found out that there wasn't really headhunting going on anymore in the tribes in Borneo.
But that didn't stop them from trekking deep into the jungle in search of evidence that headhunters had indeed existed, which led them to a cave filled with human remains.
So Hans picks this skull up, and you could see the eye sockets in the top of the skull. He's like, "Oh, Petey, come and check this out."
All of a sudden, I come out of the cave and Steve says, "You shouldn't have touched this bone, now it's bad luck." And I go like, "Why?" Because he said, "They told us not to touch anything." I said, "Oh gosh, I didn't hear that."
According to their guide Malcolm, Hans's transgression had opened a door to the spirit world.
And he said the spirit was like resting on Hans's shoulder. So Malcolm, he's pretty stern with the spirits, he came and he took it off Hans's shoulder, threw it into the ground and trampled it back into the ground like the spirit and got rid of it from Hans.
It wasn't like something that was just in my imagination. We all lived it.
He goes out and goes in search of this stuff throughout the world. That's what really drives him.
The adventure team trips was a great transition in my career because they generated a lot of magazine coverage and they were televised all over the world.
Such as his trip to Cuba in 2002.
Cuba wasn't so much about mystery than it was about history, you know, following the footsteps of Che Guevara and the Cuban Revolution. We did a first ascent of Cuba's highest peak and just had a really nice little mini adventure.
You know, Hans and I have had a standing joke about how I can, you know, try as hard to dismiss him in trials and yet have to do something on him in the magazine again because he keeps taking it to new levels. It goes back to that sense of beguiling nature about him where he's, you know, you just think he's this like beach bum riding his bicycle and yet he's been able to kind of create this empire of sorts. You know, he's the guy that's got the house in Tuscany, not me, damn it. So he's figured something out.
We always had this dream of getting away from it all, from the rat race. Actually, we found a really cool place. We loved the culture, we loved the language. We loved the fact of being self-sufficient, living somewhere on a piece of land, and it doesn't have to be a rich lifestyle. I don't have to drive a Mercedes or so. You know, it's more like have a little bed and breakfast, maybe do bike tours. Maybe living off the land, you know, having a little vineyard, doing your own olive oil and living la dolce vita.
He had in fact started a bike touring company with his sister Sylvia called Alps Tours, which has since expanded into the US market. Hans's life seemed to be rolling along. That is until he reached another fork in the road.
There at the beginning, Marissa was with Hans a lot on a lot of his trips and a lot of his shows. Towards the latter stages, it kind of seemed like Hans really didn't have Marissa announcing as much and doing as much shows. So I don't know if that was Hans's choice or Marissa's choice, maybe just, you know, wanting to go do her own thing and not always be in the shadows of Hans.
My career, including other things, probably took a toll on our marriage.
We're kind of both following our own path right now, just because Hans is really, his career is the main thing right now.
There's more to life than a career, you know, and I realized that too, but it's also, if you want to do it right, you got to do it right, and that probably can take a toll on things like relationships.
Although currently riding solo through life, Hans is still blazing trails at the forefront of the sport. Today, mountain biking is all about free riding, something Hans knows all too well.
Free riding today kind of brings together all the different aspects of mountain biking, you know, downhill, cross country, a little bit of off-trail riding.
Free riding is essentially trials on steroids, and you can see its roots in what Hans was doing 20 years ago.
Hans is essentially the granddaddy. He's the man. He's the start of the free ride scene.
Even the urban style, you know, free riding, I think he has a lot to do with where that is now, being the first guy to do that style of riding.
Hans is definitely one of the great free riders.
In 2002, Brian Lopes and I decided to do a little mini adventure, and we tackled the Rubicon Trail in Northern California, which was a really nice little free riding adventure trip.
Something that never seems to amaze me is how well Hans can ride a bike. He's very well rounded in his biking abilities. Never seems to amaze me, some of the stuff he can do.
I still look at myself not as the best bike rider ever or so. I look more at like all the things I can do on a bike, and there's a whole lot of things I'm not good at on a bike. But I understood a little bit the marketing around it, the way it works.
Hans was actually bringing in sponsors from the outside of the industry
his charisma and his enthusiasm spilled out. He was very persistent. He'd get to the right person and he'd make it happen.
I don't know how many phone calls he had to make to get his sponsors, but I'm sure it was hundreds, just, you know, every year.
I mean, he's had strong loyalty for the bike brands and his sponsors over the years, Swatch and Look and GT. Obviously, they see something to maintain that kind of length of a relationship with him.
He would come in at the end of the year, insisting upon coming in and giving me his portfolio. What I didn't know is how much press he got internationally in all these other places. And he so far exceeded anything, I almost felt like I needed to pay him more money, but we didn't.
I think, yeah, probably one of his biggest contribution is the whole sponsorship thing, the whole, you know, enabling people like myself to put on shows and actually, you know, try to make somewhat of a living at it, right? Which is super cool, right?
Very dedicated to his career.
If you were just doing it for the money, you couldn't do it.
Things don't necessarily get easier over the years, you know, to stay in shape, to come up with new ideas, to keep your sponsors or find new sponsors. That's all a big challenge. It's always changing. But the one thing that shouldn't change is the fact to have fun.
Hans has been an advocate of just having fun since the very first day on a bike.
And for the two who were there on that first day, watching Hans transform that fun into a career has been its own reward.
The name that he made for himself, that trials became well known, that people see your son on TV, that gives one feeling of pride.
So what lies ahead for Hans No Way Rey?
I've been talking about quitting since I'm 16. You know, I always said I'm gonna ride probably 1 or 2 more years and then I retire. Now I'm 36, I'm still at it, and if you ask me what I'm gonna do in 10 years from now, I'd probably be still riding my bike, chasing dreams.